Welcome everyone to what I think is our 7th Fireside Chat. I want to kick us off by introducing Ken. I'm sure a lot of you know him, but if you don't know Ken, he's the founder, CEO, and chairman of Climate First Bank. Before starting Climate First Bank, Ken had a successful track record of founding and managing 2 other community banks, Florida Choice Bank and First Green Bank. He started Climate First Bank from a profound sense of disappointment after selling First Green Bank, with his deep-seated desire to create a better world for his grandchildren. He was inspired by the book Project Drawdown, where he envisioned a bank with a central mission of reducing atmospheric CO2. So in June of 2021, we launched Climate First Bank. We were the sole benefit corporation in Florida. And since our inception, we've operated with a net zero carbon footprint, earned our certified B Corporation status in July of 2023, and have been part of a lot of amazing initiatives, including some work with Hugh and the Real Organic Project. So Ken, as always, thanks for being here. And would you please introduce your good friend and our guest, Hugh?
Awesome. Thanks. So I've been so looking forward to this fireside chat forever, and we're finally here. Hugh and I met, I don't know, 25 years ago at a Lake County Bar Association function dinner, and we just happened to sit beside each other as we were both members of the Lake County Bar Association. Hugh is a brilliant Cornell educated lawyer. He didn't want me to say that. His wife, Lisa, is his life partner and business partner, and she's a brilliant biologist. And I don't think either of them ever anticipated getting into the organic blueberry business. But Hugh had made the decision to try to save the family farm in Eustis a couple of decades ago, and we've worked together ever since then to try to accomplish that. There's another fun fact that's kind of ironic. Hugh's family house that he and Lisa live in is one of the oldest houses in Eustis, and my great-grandfather's house that he built is another one, and the house that I grew up in is another one. So we have like 3 of the oldest houses in Eustis, dating back to the 1800s. It's been a really interesting journey, and some of that we'll get into today. And Hugh has inspired me and motivated me in the agricultural sector. It's become one of my passion projects. Watching Hugh and Lisa and the amazing work they're doing, and the intersectionality of agriculture and climate, which is, of course, my other big passion. So that's kind of the intro. Hugh, did you have anything you wanted to add to that?
Well, yeah, a few minutes ago, I was just thinking about how long it's been, Ken. It's been a very long time. We've known each other, and it was long before your breakout role in Say Yes to the Dress. It was back, it was First Green Bank. I'm sorry, Florida Choice Bank. And you're right, that's my memory also. Mackenzie was 13, I think. I'm not sure how old Zach was, but this was quite a while ago. And I'll never forget meeting you there and recognizing, when you have some people come into your life, you say, well, this one's really special. I'm going to be very interested to see where this goes. And you have literally changed my life. I don't know if bankers get enough credit for this kind of thing. But you sure deserve it. And I'm one of those people you can list. You profoundly changed my life. You took a flyer on me. I was between careers, didn't know really what was going to come next. Knew I didn't want to practice law anymore. And you inspired me, supported me. Your 3 banks were instrumental in financing us and saving the family farm and starting me on a career that I didn't know was really my destiny, but I feel like now it always was. So very interesting, and so much appreciation for you and the people you work with in your banks. And I'll just leave it at that for now. But I think maybe the theme of today is really complex systems and externalities. And I think banks are similar in some ways to natural growing systems on farms. They're very complex. They good ones anyway are rooted in their local community, and they have a lot of effects that people don't always recognize, and they're very interesting, complex, and beautiful systems. So that's can't wait to talk about that, and later on we can talk about what a long, strange trip it's been.
Oh my gosh, yes. And Hugh, thank you for that. I'm a little bit embarrassed now, but I also want to add that you have profoundly changed my life in so many ways. And I have to thank you for that too. Because honestly, if it wasn't for you, I don't think there would be a First Green Bank, and I don't think there would be a Climate First. That's the honest to God truth. And for the audience, Hugh is the one that came up with the name First Green Bank. So um, he did. So Hugh, the first question from me, which I had no idea about any of this stuff until um, you and the incredible people at the Real Organic Project launched that initiative. How did organic start? What was kind of the genesis? The organic movement, and then therefore the labeling and all that stuff.
It was really very closely tied to the whole environmental movement that started in the 60s and 70s. Very much environmentally driven. This was I think the farmers' response to Silent Spring, to the recognition of degradation of the planet, that agriculture was had a big role in pollution, and in DDT, I think especially, was recognized as having these unintended consequences and horrible results. And I think it was I think farmers were early in this movement, and they were early environmentalists, and a lot of them are still very rabid environmentalists. And I think this is for two reasons. One of them is because they literally work with soil, they work with the land every day, and I think they're a bit like hikers or mountain climbers or athletes that train regularly outdoors in nature, and they're immersed in it. They're attracted to it. They feel a connection to it. They fall in love with it, and they feel a desire to care for it. So I think that's one reason they became a lot of farmers became very involved in the environmental movement. And I think the second one was because they had a front row seat to some of this pollution and degradation of our environment. So they felt it in their own bodies. These are, people were poisoned. A lot of farmers and farm workers were feeling the effects of some pretty heavy chemistry on their children and on their grandchildren. And they could see erosion in soil quality and literal erosion in soil. They saw what was happening maybe before a lot of other people, because that was their work. So the reaction to this by a large group of farmers was to say, well, no, we're headed in the wrong direction. We need to go back to more traditional farming systems, with maybe a modern perspective. But that's basically what organic is. It's respecting traditional farming systems. And maybe it's I think organic is misunderstood in a lot of ways. I think a lot of people recognize that there are very limited pesticide uses. So no synthetic pesticides, herbicides, or fertilizers are allowed in an organic farming system. But I think that's, in a lot of ways, the least important of three parts to organic agriculture. The second one is soil. And soil, I would say, is the primary focus of any good organic farmer. I think any good farmer. And excuse me. And the third is environmental stewardship. But to go back to the second one for a minute, that's what I really would hope to convey to people listening, is that this is what organic farmers concentrate on the most. It's soil and soil quality. And here's a nice factoid for you. Organic farming grows food with living soil, and in living soil, in a teaspoon of good soil, 1 teaspoon, there are more microbes than there are humans on the planet. There are more than 8 billion microbes in a teaspoon of soil. And what I've understood from a lot of farmers with more experience than me is that this microbiotic community, this life that's in soil, is really barely understood by anybody. And I learned that we can only identify 10% of the microbes that are living in soil, let alone what their individual roles are. And I asked one of my cousins is a PhD plant pathologist, is a career as a professor, ag professor at Cornell, and I said, "Hey, Meg, I've been learning that you guys can only identify, you top academics, you can only identify 10% of the microbes that live in soil." And she said, "No, that's not fair." She said, "It's more like 1%." So somewhere between 10% and 1% is all we understand, is all we can identify. And so this is basically a miraculous thing that if you're a farmer, you get to see every day and wonder about. There's this extraordinary universe that's living in soil, and there's this complex biology and physics and chemistry that goes on between the soil and the plant itself, the crop plant itself. And there's this mutual exchange of material, and I like to think of it as a form of intelligence, a kind of genius that's at work there, where plants will actually do the farming. So the root tips, the exudates that come from the tips of the roots of a plant go out into the soil, and a plant will literally, if it's allowed to in a healthy soil-based organic system, will communicate with all of those billions and billions of microbes that live in that soil, and will literally recruit them to go and change their own chemistry. So, for example, a plant that's trying to deal with a predator or a destructive pest like a grasshopper can seek out different minerals and byproducts, different compounds, and bring them into its own internal system and change its own chemistry to repel that pest. And it's it's analogous to a high functioning immune system in a human body. So there's this incredible complexity in soil, and this is what's happening every day in a good organic system, and it's what organic farmers concentrate on. And I would finish that description with a reminder about how little we understand about our own bodies, and the fact that most of the cells in our body are in us but not of us, and that would be our gut microbiome. And there are, nobody counts these things, right? But 100 trillion microbes in your body, in each of our bodies, 100 trillion. And they're in a mass of that approximately 5 pounds. You're born with this, and you absolutely rely on it for your life. Without it, you'd be dead in a few hours, or certainly days. You cannot function as a mammal or as a human without this complex microbiotic community that lives with you and is mutually dependent with you, interdependent. And a lot of us believe that there's a reason why we have this community and why it's so similar to what the soil community is like. And it's because they co-evolved over eons. So human beings have eaten soil-grown food for a long, long time. And what disturbs a lot of us is that we're now doing a massive experiment with basically test tube foods and chemically produced foods that don't have this, that are not grown with this complexity and life, and we're feeding them to our bodies that are really not equipped to make much of them. So we're feeding kind of dead food to our bodies and expecting our health to maintain itself, and that's really not realistic, I don't think. So that's the focus on soil, and why organic farmers are so insistent on the importance of soil. And then of course, the last element of organic agriculture that I think is maybe most often overlooked are the externalities of the environmental stewardship, which is supposed to be part of an organic production system, and the ecological function that happens on a healthy organic farm, as opposed to maybe creating an environment which is much more sterile and relies on some pretty harsh chemistry, which becomes a negative externality for the rest of the environment.
Well, Hugh, to your point on the massive experiment that has been foisted upon us by the food industrial complex, is already having extremely bad outcomes, with the obesity epidemic, all of the psychiatric stuff, the spectrum disorders, and all that, which I'm sure we'll get into in a minute. But it's kind of like a three-pronged thing. What is organic? How did it come about? And then what is organic now? What we think of organic is that little label on the food, which, as you and I know, isn't really legit. And then what is beyond organic? And gosh, what's his name? Joel Salatin, the Polyface Farms, was preaching the beyond organic way back decades ago, but it just now finally seems to have happened. But can you tell us a little bit about the USDA labeling thing, how it came about, and what it has become? And what I found really interesting over the years is when you originally got your USDA label, and then what you have to go through every year. Well, I guess we'll probably get into that too, the certifiers and stuff.
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And I think that's not well understood by the general public. But I think it's important to remember that the organic movement started long before the government got involved. So the government didn't start this. They didn't start organic in this country. It was farmers that did that. And so once the farmers got more recognition and their food got more recognition, people started looking for organic food for the reasons that I think I described. So for health, for taste, for nutrition, for environmental stewardship. And then it started to get more sought after. It was more popular and sought out. And the farmers wanted to protect this concept. They wanted to make sure that that if they grew this way, that there would be some sort of definition for this kind of farming, some sort of consistency. And so when people went to the store and they found this, they would know, okay, this is actually the sort of food that I'm looking for and the sort of farming system I want to support. So the farmers went and lobbied the government, and they said, we'd like to have legislation which protects this word and this concept. So that was quite a long process. And then in 1990, the Organic Food Production Act, OFPA, was signed into law. And then in the decade after that, the USDA, of course, promulgated the regulations that and basically enacted it. And the structure is fairly simple, and most organic farmers, I think, will tell you that the law is quite good. And we can get in a minute into the enforcement of the law, which is quite bad. But the law itself is quite good. And what it requires is that if somebody wants to use the word organic on their label, on their product, they have to comply with the law, and they're required to come up with a farm plan. This is a detailed plan on how they're going to farm, what materials they're going to use to farm, what systems they will use, and also how they will treat the natural resources on their farm, which is defined by the USDA as the woodlands, wetlands, wildlife, and water. So these are the ecological functions that need to be protected in order for you to also use that label. And so if a detailed farm plan gets submitted by a farm that wants to call itself organic and market its produce as organic, and then the next step in the process is they work with a certifier. So the United States Department of Agriculture does not certify farms as organic. They've basically deputized about 70 or 80 organizations which are responsible for overseeing these farms and making sure that the farmers are doing what they say they will in their organic systems plan. So that involves very detailed accounting of what's done every year, everything that's applied to the land, and it includes also a physical inspection of the property. We get inspected by a certifier each and every year. We're subject to spot inspections also, and they want to make sure that we're farming the way that our plan calls for and that they've approved. So there's quite a bit of oversight, and that's very encouraging. At least on our farm, we've been impressed. We've enjoyed the scrutiny, and then as long as you are complying with the law, you are allowed to use that word in your product. So this is a really important distinction between organic and all natural or sustainable or regenerative. There no other terms, and regenerative, of course, is the problematic one because it's new on the scene, and a lot of people claim to farm and create food that's regenerative, but it doesn't mean anything. There's literally no legal definition. Anybody can just call themselves regenerative or sustainable or all natural. There isn't any restriction on that. Whereas the word organic and the label have this whole legal structure behind them, and you can't just go ahead and use it. They'll come after you for doing that. So that's how it started. It started with the farmers, but then they moved to government oversight as something to protect this type of farming, and that's the way it went for a few years. And then as things seem to happen these days in our society, big money got involved, big agriculture got involved. They started to use their influence on our government, and we've seen a tremendous erosion in what it means to be an organic farm and what it means what it means to a piece of food, whether it's produce or whether it's an animal product, what it means to be organic. And this became extremely troubling to the farmers who started this movement. A lot of them are older now. The guys that really started this in the 60s and 70s, it's been their life's work, and they're livid at how standards have been eroded in the enforcement of the standards. The law hasn't changed, but the way it's been administered by the USDA and what is now allowed to be called organic is very, very different than what these people envisioned and really what any fair reading of the law requires. So we now have a very different environment where there are some farms which get the USDA label, but really bear no resemblance to anything that I described, either in terms of taste or nutrition or ecological function. So, and a lot of them don't even have anything to do with soil, which is really bizarre from an organic perspective, because that's the root of the whole farming system.
No pun intended.
Yeah, sorry. So that's the, and if you'd like, I can go into more detail about what that looks like and why there's so much consternation in a lot of the agricultural community about this new development. And I wouldn't say it's just organic farmers who are upset about this. Conventional chemical-based farmers in this country are also upset about it, because what's behind it is enormous multinational big ag businesses which have moved to Central and South America and are, as Zephyr Teachout said, are using organic as a secret weapon to compete against domestic farming production. So they're growing in hydroponic systems in Central and South America. And then that is being labeled organic. It's coming back into this country, and it competes against real organic food and also against domestic conventionally produced food.
Hey, Hugh, remind me, but wasn't, the label, the USDA label that we see on all our packaging, I mean, that's really valuable intellectual property, right? Didn't that get assigned to the U.S. government or something somewhere along the way?
Yes, so that's protected. That's a protected image, and you are only allowed to use it if you go through this whole process of creating a farm plan and then all of the oversight on an annual basis. So you can't use the word organic, and you can't use that image unless you're unless your certifier says everything is okay. And
wasn't it assigned to the government with the thought that, well, if it's owned by the government, at least it'll be protected? And now the
yes,
exact opposite has happened, and it's become a weapon of industrial agriculture. One thing that really bothers the crap out of me is when I go into Publix and go to buy berries, any berry, blueberries, um, strawberries, anything, and the only thing they have in the cooler is Driscoll's. And so I was thinking, how could that be? How could Driscoll's be the only supplier of berries in Publix? Oh my God, they're the only supplier of berries in Whole Foods. Oh my God, they're the only supplier of berries, anywhere you go. And tell us about that. You touched on it, the growing in pots, not in soil, hydroponically fed, and how on earth that can now be considered organic. And doesn't Driscoll's now control something like 70% of the U.S. berry market? It's probably not a conversation for here, but as both of us being lawyers, how is that not restrained trade, Um, but and also, before I forget, we've got some graphics too that we can show, don't we, on it's not hydroponic, but it is hydroponic, the pot grown stuff.
yeah, that's 70% is, I think, their own figure. 70% of the organic berries, anyway. That's by their own account. I think maybe it's more than that. But if you think about that in terms of what we normally do with antitrust law in this country, is we don't allow any company to get to that size. There's if you're a telecom company or something, 70%, or a bank, that's inconceivable. But for some reason, for food, that's acceptable. But this is, I should define hydroponic first. I think a hydroponic growing system is one where the plant gets its nutrition from a liquid feed. So in a soil-based system, in a real organic system, the nutrition comes primarily from the breakdown of organic matter. It comes from all of this microbial activity and this incredibly complex and poorly understood miraculous interchange that happens between the plant and the soil itself. In a hydroponic system, the plant gets its nutrition from a simplistic. It's a formula that really hasn't changed much in decades. It's just a water-based brine that's got some primary and secondary micronutrients in it, and it's dripped through an inert substrate, so a soil substitute. And in the case of organic blueberries, that's now the predominant organic growing system in the world. It's usually coconut coir, which is coconut husk harvested, processed in Sri Lanka, and then shipped halfway around the world to Central and South America and put in plastic pots or plastic bags. And then this hydroponic solution is dripped through the pot. There's no water holding capacity. If you shut off this IV, the plant would die very quickly. And it doesn't have this system, soil-based system, where there's billions and billions of microbes that are working with the plant to produce the food. It's just a solution of fertilizer that goes through there. And you can see on some of these images, this is a typical system. The ground is covered with, excuse me, is covered with plastic. It's laser leveled and excuse me, compacted, which makes the soil unsuitable for farming. And then a bunch of plastic pots or plastic bags are put on top of there, and a plant is stuck in the bag, and then the drip tubes are run along the top, and the soil is actually being treated like a septic system. It's just taking plastic leachates and whatever drips through the pot and goes down into the soil. And of course, we're more and more aware of plastics and synthetic estrogens that they produce in the human body or any mammal, and a lot of the problems that causes. But these are enormous plastic-based systems that have taken over. This is where most of organic blueberries come from now. Peru, for example, almost all grown with this system. Much bigger producers in the United States now. This is where most of our berries come from. And this exodus of farming from this country and its movement to Central and South America by these enormous multinationals is incredibly alarming on all kinds of levels. We like to say, if you listen to the USDA, talk a lot about feeding the world. That might be true if you're talking about beef or some of the agronomic wheat, corn, and soy crops. But if you're talking about food that a lot of us think is really good for our bodies, fruits and vegetables, we now don't come close to feeding ourselves. We import more than 60% of the fruit that we eat in this country. We import more than 40% of the vegetables that we now eat in this country. And increasingly, this is the type of agriculture that's producing that food. And horrifyingly, this is being called organic.
Hugh, the thing that strikes me is that once again, humans are so arrogant that they think they can emulate what's in the soil with some stupid drip brine that's got a couple of things thrown in there.
Yeah, we seem to constantly do this. We have this sort of species-wide arrogance about what it is we can do and how much we understand. And we really don't. We continually get in trouble with this. I don't know how many times we're going to have to see this with, chemistry and chemicals that we use for all kinds of purposes, and pollution we've caused, and the climate that we've now altered. Climate's probably the best example of this, thinking that, oh, sure, we can just do whatever we want without regard for this interconnected system that we all live in. So
real quick, Hugh, you hit on something that I just made the parallel, the corollary. We have now in full force the exodus of farming from America. We're offshoring farming. We've had full force exodus of manufacturing. Now all the legislatures and state and federal are saying, oh, we got to bring manufacturing back. I sure hope it doesn't take 25 years for them to realize, oh, we need to bring agriculture back. Because this is jobs. This is everything. This is everything that appeals to both sides of the aisle.
Yeah, that's incredibly powerful. And I'm very concerned about that, because I'm not a whole lot older than the median farmer in this country. Median age is 58 is the median age for farmers.
Whoa.
That's getting up there. And a lot of these farms are still operating, but they're basically zombie farms, because they can't in good conscience encourage their kids to do this, because it's become such an incredibly difficult way to even make a living. And they can't open their books and expect anybody to be interested in carrying it on. So, but they figure, well, I'll keep going for a while. I know how to do this, and my land's getting more valuable, but they don't have any real intention of continuing. And once these farms are gone, they're not coming back, because the infrastructure is gone. The rural communities that used to have businesses that supported them are leaving also. So you need the people who, like your ancestors, Ken, right? You need the guys who invent and fix the machinery that makes farming efficient. You need the tractor dealerships. You need the parts. You need whatever supplies are used in agriculture. When that infrastructure starts to weaken and go away, it's incredibly difficult to imagine that all of that can be brought back quickly.
Yeah,
So
and then Dave Chapman just sent something that was really important that, like you mentioned earlier, Hugh, the law, the USDA organic laws are good, because the thought process maybe for the listeners is, well, if we have a good law, how on earth is this getting so contorted? And it's the enforcement is not happening. And quite frankly, that really kicked off in really strong earnest under the Trump administration. And hopefully there's not another one. I had to get that political plug in there. But yeah, speak to that a little bit. And then the wheat debacle was one thing that stuck in my mind.
yeah, I'm not sure where to start. I'm not sure where to start with that. But let me say that it's not just the farmers that are concerned about this. And I think Leon Panetta was the first one I've heard talk about this publicly, but the former Secretary of Defense um, talked about this as a national security issue. And I think it's definitely a national security issue. It's obviously a health issue. It's an environmental issue that picture that you just had up is really significant, just to give people an idea of the scale of these Central and South American farms, supposedly
Rachel, put
organic
that
farms.
picture, or Maria, put that picture back up.
This is again, that plastic covers the ground. A plastic bag or plastic pot is put on top of it, and then plastic hoop houses are built over on top of that. And you'll see from a following slide that just how enormous this is. And the next one. So there are valleys in Mexico. Maybe one more to give you even more zoomed out. There are valleys in Mexico that are just covered in white plastic. These are enormous, enormous operations. And one of the reasons why they're so profitable is because of exploitation, not just of the natural resources, but also of people. So the people that work on these farms are typically paid $1 an hour, $10 a day for difficult agricultural work. And increasingly in Mexico, Hondurans and Guatemalans are hired because they're more distressed and they'll work for less than Mexican ag workers will. So even Mexican farmers' land is being usurped, their water is being usurped, their labor is being usurped, and it's creating these hydroponic crops that are coming back into this country with the USDA's complicity and participation and basically encouragement, because they send certifiers down there. And it's changing organic agriculture and agriculture writ large. So I just get so shocked by this, I lose my train of thought. But this is not just blueberries. This is also these hydroponics. This is also tomatoes. It's very hard to find an organic tomato in this country that's not hydroponic now. Probably north of 90% of the beefsteak tomatoes are hydroponic. And peppers, cucumbers, greens, the list goes on. This is a big, huge takeover. And to your point, Ken, about this is one thing I really would like people to recognize and to remember from this conversation. This is the only country in the world that allows this. So nowhere else in the world can you get away with labeling hydroponically produced product as organic. Only in the United States does this happen. Not in the EU, not in Australia, not in Central and South America. You can't. They can grow this stuff and send it to us, and it gets labeled as organic. But nowhere else in the world can you sell this as organic. So one last thing I want to get back to, because it's something really important that you said about how in the world can you grow some produce like this and consider it the same thing as soil grown real organic produce. Unfortunately, the plants will respond to it. You can grow a tomato or a blueberry very quickly and very efficiently and very cheaply with these systems after the huge initial capital outlay, very cheaply. But it's a bit like McDonald's can grow a human being quickly. You can grow a big human eating McDonald's food. It's not the same thing. And we're finding it's more and more obvious to our biggest customers, the most rabid customers are chefs, nutritionists. I would say people in neuroscientists or people in neurology, doctors who deal with the brain, and small children. And I'm not sure which one are my favorites, but the chefs say food has been dumbed down so badly, and hydroponics just don't taste like real food, that they're being sold as organic. There's no comparison at all. They're horrified that they can't source what they want for good tasting food. And I think most people recognize that nutrition follows taste. They're very, very closely identified with each other because our bodies understand what's good for us and we crave good food. And then the nutritionists realize that there's no comparison between hydroponic and soil-based organic produce. The neuroscientists recognize, how important the antioxidants, the anthocyanins in good berries are, and so they seek them out. And then children I would turn to last because there's no guile, right? You can't you can't make a kid fake it. And when you see when we see 3 and 4 and 5-year-olds just covered in blueberries because they can't stuff them in their mouths fast enough, when we have so many of our customers send us photographs of their little kids. It's really fun. So sorry about rambling on that, but this is such an enormous topic and such an important one. Give me some more guidance, Ken. What do you want to hear?
Yeah, I'm sorry, I was on mute because there was a motorcycle going by outside. But one thing for the listeners, Dan Barber, who's a world-renowned chef, wrote a great book, The Third Plate, and I would highly recommend it. It's not only entertaining, but it goes into a lot of this, including fish and the grazing animals and all that kind of stuff. But Hugh, before we run out of time, I think humans want hope in anything, so I think there is hope, and it's the Real Organic Project that you have been immersed in, and to some extent we at the bank have been immersed in. What is the Real Organic Project, and how did it start, and all that kind of stuff?
Thank you. Yeah, Lisa was holding up a sign on the other side of my screen here, jumping up and down. Real Organic Project. Yeah, there's hope. So these same farmers who saw this happening said we just can't allow this. This is a tragedy. So they got organized, and the outgrowth of that is the Real Organic Project, and this started around 2018. And it's farmers started this. It's a grassroots, farmer-led, farmer-organized, farmer-driven project, the Real Organic Project, to raise awareness about this and to try and reverse this. Because and there's two things that really that were the impetus for this, and one of them is hydroponics, which we've talked about. And the other one is CAFOs, which is concentrated animal feeding operations. This is basically feedlots. And this is where chickens or cows, for example, are confined, and food is brought to them rather than them being out on pasture, as organic was always intended to be. And we've now reached a situation where a lot of, or maybe most of, the organic dairy and organic chicken eggs and chicken products are actually coming from these enormous factory farms where the animals are subjected to incredibly inhumane treatment. They're living in their own, fecal matter. They're jammed together. The USDA has allowed 3 chickens per square foot. It's 3 chickens per square foot in enormous indoor facilities with where the chickens never get outside, and this is considered acceptable to them. This just give you a little bit of an idea of the profound influence that these huge companies and agribusinesses have over our government. So as has been pointed out, the food and agriculture industry spend more money in lobbying our government than the defense industry does. So this is what you now see for a lot, probably most of USDA certified organic chicken eggs come from facilities like this.
Hey, Hugh, one thing I wanted to point out, because I was texting our team to see if they had a copy of the logo of the Real Organic Project. So the USDA logo on the upper left is what we as consumers are used to seeing. The Real Organic Project logo is further up in the left, and that's an add-on label. There you go. So the farmer has to be USDA organic certified, but then they have to go through a separate certification for the Real Organic Project. And how many farmers, Hugh, are there now?
There are 1,100 certified ones. That's increasing rapidly. This is a 501c3. Farmers don't have a ton of money to spend on this. The organization exists based on the support of small and large donors, and much of the money goes towards very little administrative costs at all. Much of the money goes towards this group of certifiers that we have now who go throughout the country and certify. Basically, they certify that a farm is operating under the law as written. So not really changing the law or the standards significantly from what the USDA allows, but actually making sure that it happens. So when you buy a chicken egg, like in that photograph, you know that those chickens were out on pasture. And if you buy organic yogurt or organic milk, you know that those cows were out on pasture and not confined in a feedlot somewhere where they're being fed grain that's supposedly organic that comes from Eastern Europe. So again, we always go back to the soil with Real Organic and the belief that good soil grows a good, healthy crop, also grows good grass and pasture for chickens and for cows. And so that healthy soil creates a healthy animal, which ultimately creates a healthier human being. And the treatment of animals, of course, is entirely different. But I do want to say that along with the Real Organic Project is quite an extraordinary movement. And anybody who's got any interest in agriculture at all, organic or otherwise, would really help themselves understand this by going to the Real Organic Project website. And there are about 200 interviews that have been done with top farmers, scientists, chefs, eaters of all kinds. Vincent Stanley there, your friend Vincent, gave a great talk just a couple of days ago. I watched that one. There's a library of information there, which is staggering, and you can get a real education from that. And then we talked about the label a little bit. And before I forget, I want to say one more thing about hope here, which is that we talked about the 70 or 80 certifiers which are responsible for implementing the USDA certification and label. And a lot of these certifiers are equally horrified. And they've taken a position that they will no longer do this. They will not certify as organic hydroponically grown crops. And they've really gone out on a limb. These are courageous people, but this is their livelihood. So the USDA has threatened them and said, well, if you don't certify hydro, we're going to take away your own certification. You'll no longer be able to certify food as organic. So that's their jobs. So they're saying, we're going to put you out of business. At this point, they haven't risked the publicity and outrage that doing that would cause. But these certifiers have broken free, and there's a split now. And there are 10 of them, and together they represent approximately 1/3 of the USDA certified farms in this country. Not by volume of food, because just a few companies now control an enormous volume. But if you talk about the farms themselves, just these 10 certifiers who are refusing to do this anymore, they represent 1/3 of the farms are certified by them. But I'd like to clarify this. That doesn't mean that only 1/3 of organic farmers in this country feel this way. Almost all of us do. I'm not certified by one of these 10. I'm certified by one of the 60 that says it's okay. But I don't think this is okay. So really, if you dig down into it, there's only a few entities which have created this problem and which are profiting from it, and they produce a lot of food now because these are huge companies. But this is anathema for most organic farmers, because it's very different than what we all envisioned. There's not the taste, there's not the nutrition, there's not the emphasis on soil and on preserving soil and improving soil, and there's certainly not the same emphasis on ecological function and the importance of environmental stewardship that we all feel.
We probably should go to the Q&A, right, Lauren? We did get a question from one of our.
I'm sorry, Ken. Lisa's waving at me again. She's really quite beautiful, but she's equally camera shy. She should be doing this, not me. Yeah. So she's waving at me and she says, letter. So these 10 certifiers have come up with a position statement, and it goes through this in 3 or 4 pages of detail. It's very well written. It's very well supported. And this is something that people can do. They can go on the Real Organic Project website. They can find this position statement and they can sign a petition in support of it.
Hey, Lauren, Rachel, Adam, everybody, can we send that letter out to our network, our huge network of 7,000 emails or whatever it is we have?
Yeah, I believe we also just put it in our chat for everyone.
Okay. So before we get to Q&A, we pitched the Real Organic Project. Please follow their stuff. It's fantastic. Send them a check, even if it's a small check. I want to also pitch Hugh's Farm. He's completely direct to consumer now. That was another whole, we could have another great session. Yeah, that's it. 5 pound box. Another great session on the other abominations of the farming system that's controlled by the brokers and all that. But Hugh is direct to consumer. They also sell frozen, and blueberries are medicine, believe it or not. There's no other medicine you can take that's as tasty. Literally a handful a day will increase your brain function. It's been proven. And then I wanted to pitch the bank, and we're doing a capital raise right now. So I need to raise more capital to keep up our exceptional growth and impact. So we'll go to questions, Lauren.
Shameless plug, I love it. Well, I know we only have about 7 minutes, and the chat that we've had today there's a ton of engagement. I feel like people have been really enjoying the conversation, and hence why we've gone a little over before getting to Q&A. So if we don't get to your questions, don't feel free to engage with the bank, and we'll try to make sure we get answers from Hugh and Ken, and make sure you come out of this chat with all the knowledge that you were seeking. So I'll try to get to one question that I think is maybe one of the best ones that I'll probably eat over the next 6 minutes. But I think it does help tie in this conversation, particularly between Hugh and Ken, which is like, what do you think could help fix the U.S. farms finance crisis with the majority of farmers and ranchers operating at a loss? They don't own their land. I know that banking and agriculture don't have the strongest history. So how can farmers invest in getting soil health conservation or organic practices in the ground if the financing and insurance incentives for diversified operations are just not there?
Well, that's a great question. We at Climate First Bank have done an absolutely horrible job of it. And we did at our last bank the same thing. We just couldn't crack the agricultural nut. A lot of it is because of the USDA Farm Credit Program, and they over the last 30 years have basically taken all the lending from the banks, and it's not a system that I think favors organic. And Hugh probably has more input on that. But we are working on an initiative now with a group that was formed to just finance transition and regenerative agriculture. So we may, within the next 6 months, be rolling out a program. There's also the first, um, um, oh, dang it, what's the format for a mutual bank? The first mutual bank formed in like 100 years, up in the Northeast, Walden Mutual, and their entire mission is small ag and transitional. So I got to put in a plug for them too. Hugh, did you have insight into that?
There's so much we don't get to, and the intersection of good agriculture and climate. They're so closely tied, and the practices we need to change in order to address climate change. But to get back to the banking part, I just keep, as I get educated by my work, I just keep understanding how these decentralized, smaller personal systems work so well. And banking's one of them. The community and regional banks have so much respect for me because I just watch how the work that you do has so much more effect than just lending money, and that you're closely tied to your communities. And I think we see more and more. We're seeing too big to fail in agriculture now, after we saw too big to fail in finance. This is crazy stuff. We should be learning from things like the pandemic that decentralized systems are more robust, and we really ought to be supporting smaller scale farms. And that's, basically what good organic farming is small and medium sized farms, not these huge agribusinesses. So I think there are a lot of commonalities between good finance, good banking, and positive externalities, and you see that in agriculture too. So I just get horrified when I see the loss of these things, and see you guys having to compete with things like farm credit. What farm credit, for people who don't know, is basically another government supported program. It's a system of lending institutions that aren't required to comply with the same requirements that traditional banks are. They get the profit center, but they don't have to do a lot of the services. So they make loans, and increasingly it's to larger and larger farming entities. Now they just make loans really to big companies. They've been famous recently for making loans to Cracker Barrel, as if they're some sort of icon of good agriculture and good food production. But they're profitable because of the favoritism they get from government policy and tax policy. So I keep coming back to the importance of good, connected, interconnected, interdependent local systems, farming and finance and virtually everything. So I hope we all recognize that and move in that direction. And another Zephyr Teach Out reference, she's said, it's great to vote with your dollar, but you can also vote with your vote. So this, of course, policy is made by our government, and our political involvement affects policy. So there's a lot of bad policy being implemented at the moment. We just touched on some of it, but I think it's pretty important that we all participate in the political process too.
I forgot one shameless plug. I talked about Walden Mutual for a second, but there's another non-bank lender called Mad Ag. They're doing some fantastic work in the small farmer space and regenerative and converting. Lauren, do we have time for another one or not?
We just have one more minute, so I think we should end how we always end, which is just like, what would be your top advice to our listeners of an action they can take? I know we've touched on a little bit, but just to recap. So what would be your kind of message of inspiration of an action that we can all take here as guests today?
Let me throw a couple in there real quick. One is, don't buy Driscoll's, and the second one is, know where your money sleeps at night. So, Hugh, what do you think?
Yeah, I'll agree with those. Support the Real Organic Project. And one way you do that is direct support, but also education. Go educate yourself, educate people you know. an incredible resource there. And what the Real Organic Project does also is put on big conferences, increasingly each year. They get bigger and bigger. There's one coming up next month in Hudson Valley, New York, and at Churchtown. You can learn about that. If you want to attend that virtually, I think you'll be glad you did. And then, of course, voting with your dollar. If you can support good agriculture in any way that you can, if you can find the Real Organic Project label, or you can otherwise find farmers that are farming well, support them. And then the petition we talked about, I think that's a direct action that people could do. They could go today and sign that petition and raise more awareness about that. And Lisa just reminded me that the Real Organic Project also has a map of certified farms throughout the country. People go on the website, they can find not only people like me that sell direct to the public and ship, but also farms that might be closer to them geographically.
Well, thank you, Hugh. You've shared a lot of wisdom today. I can tell just by how excited this chat has been. It's been hard to keep up with. So
I talked
thank
a
you.
lot. I don't know. I don't know if there's wisdom, but there's a lot of talk.
I guess a special thank you to Lisa as well from behind the scenes. But thank you both so much for being here with us today. We'll definitely have a follow-up email to attendees with some of the resources that were shared, as well as a link to the recording of this video. But we also have some incredible fireside chats that we've had in the past with Dave Chapman from Real Organic Project and Vincent Stanley. So please check out our YouTube channel. There's a lot of great education resources as it pertains to this topic on our channels. So thank you everyone for joining, and thank you Hugh and Kent for spending time with us.
Thank you so much to Climate First Bank. Just appreciate the work you're doing so much.
Well, I can't live without your blueberries, so I'm more grateful. Thanks everyone for joining. Have a good day.